was interesting on the Day of the Dead, November 1st. Okay, the atmosphere in the cemetery was like a party.
The atmosphere in the cemetery was like a party.
Was the atmosphere very sad?
Was the atmosphere very sad? No, the atmosphere was not sad. The atmosphere was like a party and were very happy.
No, the atmosphere was not sad. The atmosphere was like a party. The atmosphere was very happy. Was the atmosphere sad or happy?
Was the atmosphere sad or happy? The atmosphere was happy. The atmosphere was like a party.
The atmosphere was happy. The atmosphere was like a party. What was like a party?
What was like a party? The atmosphere in the cemetery was like a party.
The atmosphere in the cemetery was like a party. Where was the atmosphere like a party?
Where was the atmosphere like a party? In the cemetery. The atmosphere was like a party in the cemetery.
In the cemetery. The cemetery. The atmosphere was like a party in the cemetery. Was the atmosphere like a party at my house?
Was the atmosphere like a party at my house? No, not at my house. The atmosphere was like a party at the cemetery.
No, not at my house. The atmosphere was like a party in the cemetery. The atmosphere was not like a party in my house. So the atmosphere was like a party. There were people everywhere. Families were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors.
Families were sitting around the grave of their dead ancestors.
Where were the families sitting?
Where were the families sitting? Around the grave. They were sitting around the grave.
Around the graves. They
grave.
were sitting around the graves.
Grave.
Who was sitting around the grave?
Who was sitting around the grave? The families. The families were sitting around the grave.
The families. Right? The families were sitting around the graves. Were they sitting around the trees?
Were they sitting around the tree? No. They weren't sitting around the tree. They were sitting around the grave.
No, they weren't sitting around the trees. They were sitting around the graves.
Grave.
So, Where were they sitting?
Where were they sitting? Around the grave. Families were sitting around the grave of their dead, etc.
Around the graves. Families were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Were they sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors?
Were they sitting around the grave of their dead ancestors? Yes, yes. They were sitting around the grave of their dead ancestors.
Yes, yes. They were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Were they sitting around the graves of their friends?
Were they sitting around the grave of their friend? No. They were sitting around the grave of their dead ancestor.
No, not really. They were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Who was sitting around the graves?
Who were sitting around the grave? Yes, families were sitting around the grave.
That's right. Families were sitting around the graves. Whose graves were they sitting around?
Whose grave were they sitting around? Yes. Their dead ancestors. They were sitting around the grave of their dead ancestors.
Whose graves were they sitting around? Yes, their dead ancestors. Their ancestors. Their ancestors' graves. They were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. Were they sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors or the graves of their friends?
Were they sitting around the grave of the dead ancestor or the grave of their friends? Ancestor. Right. They were sitting around the grave of the dead ancestor.
Ancestors, right? They were sitting around the graves of their dead ancestors. They cleaned the graves and added fresh flowers.
They cleaned the grave and added fresh flower.
Okay. Who cleaned the graves?
Who cleaned the grave? Yes, the families.
That's right, the families.
The families.
What did they add?
What did they add? They add fresh flour.
They added fresh flowers.
Yes.
Did they add food?
Did they add food? No, they didn't add food.
No, they didn't add food. Did they add money?
Did they add money? No. Did they add money? They didn't add money. They added fresh flour.
No, they didn't add money. They added fresh flowers.
Fresh flowers.
What did they clean?
What did they clean? They cleaned the grave.
They cleaned the graves.
Grave.
Whose graves did they clean?
Who grave did they clean? Their ancestors. They clean their ancestors' graves.
Their ancestors, right? They cleaned their ancestors' graves.
Yes.
Where did they add flowers?
Where did they add flour? They added flour fresh. They added flour to the grave.
Where?
To the grave.
Oh, they added flowers to the graves.
Grave.
That's right. They cleaned the graves and added fresh flowers.
Flour.
Good. I walked